Two young women. Two different cities. Both believed they were safe, both were wrong. Mahogany Jackson, just 20, thought she was spending the night with friends. Hours later, she was begging for help in a secret text to her mother. By morning, her body was found dumped and shot. A year later, Dakara Thompson, 19, told her dad she was only stepping out for gas. But cameras caught her slipping into a black SUV. Days later, she too was found discarded off a lonely road. Two stories, one haunting pattern. Trust given to the wrong people and lives cut short. Mahogany Jackson was only 20 years old, a young mother with her whole life ahead of her. But in February 2024, Mahogany Jackson's world turned into a nightmare. Trapped inside an apartment in Birmingham, she realized her friends weren't her friends at all. They had turned on her. Hours of torture and humiliation followed, and the very people she once trusted recorded her pain like it was entertainment. In the middle of it all, Mahogany managed one last act of courage. She found a sliver of opportunity, grabbed a phone, and sent a desperate message to her mother. It was short, urgent, stripped of everything but survival. Send the police. Apartment 3. Held hostage. Don't call. No emojis. No wasted words. Just raw fear pressed into a few lines of text. When Mahogany's mother received that chilling text, she didn't hesitate. She dialed 911 and begged for help. Officers with the Birmingham Police Department rushed to the Serenity Apartments, racing against time. But when they arrived at Unit 3, the unit Mahogany had pinned in her message, the apartment was silent. No signs of a struggle, no voices, no Mahogany. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Detectives knew immediately that this wasn't a simple missing persons case. Mahogany's text was too specific, too desperate. Something terrible had already happened. Her family filed the official report, and the case shifted into high gear. Overnight, officers canvassed the area, questioned neighbors, and pulled surveillance footage, looking for any trace of the 20-year-old mother. Within hours, tips started to pour in. Witnesses mentioned seeing her with familiar faces, people she trusted. Others described hearing shouting, even recording equipment being used inside the apartment. Every lead pointed to something far darker than anyone wanted to believe. By the next morning, February 25, 2024, the search ended in heartbreak. Mahogany's body was discovered at an illegal dump site on Laurel Avenue, covered in old mattresses and debris, treated like trash. She had been shot in the back of the head, execution style. The scene told investigators what words couldn't. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was deliberate, calculated, personal. And it was clear from the start, whoever did this knew her well. Before headlines carried her name, Mahogany Jackson was simply a young woman chasing a better life. She grew up in Jasper, Alabama, but by her late teens she moved to Birmingham to start fresh. At just 20, she owned her own salon, a space where women left not only looking better but feeling stronger. On top of that, she was raising her young daughter, balancing motherhood and business with quiet resilience. Mahogany also carried a trait that defined her: loyalty. She believed in second chances, keeping ties with old friends even when they had already shown her who they were. That kindness, though, would become her greatest risk. While Mahogany built her future, some in her circle stayed stuck, caught in drama, jealousy, and resentment. They mocked her success, questioned her parenting, and whispered that she thought she was better than everyone else. Then came the breaking point: a stolen gun. Mahogany confronted them directly, refusing to stay quiet. But instead of resolving things, her honesty made her a target. To those already fueled by envy, she wasn't the victim, she was the problem. And in that moment, the betrayal that would claim her life began to take shape. If you're finding these stories meaningful or informative, please consider subscribing to our channel. It really helps us keep bringing you more content like this. February 24, 2024, started like any other evening. Mahogany left her home believing she was going to clear the air, to settle the growing tension with people she still considered friends. The meeting place was familiar: Serenity Apartments, Unit 3. The name itself carried a cruel irony: Serenity. It wasn't some dark alley or a stranger's house. It was a place she'd been before, tied to faces she had trusted for years. To Mahogany, it must have felt like just another uncomfortable but necessary conversation. She expected arguments, maybe shouting, maybe hurt feelings, but not danger. What she couldn't have known was that by the time she walked through that door, the decision had already been made. She wasn't walking into a talk. She was walking into a setup. The moment she stepped inside, everything shifted. The door clicked shut behind her. Her phone was snatched away. There were no explanations, no smiles, no chance to escape. Hands restrained her, and in an instant, the people she once defended and trusted became her captors. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment fight. It was deliberate, organized, cruel. From the very start, Mahogany was treated not as a friend, not even as a person, but as an object of their anger and jealousy. She was shoved, beaten, humiliated. And as if the violence itself wasn't enough, they made sure it was documented. Phones came out. Cameras rolled. Some attacked her, others laughed, and a few just stood by watching silently. The betrayal in that moment is something almost impossible to imagine. These weren't strangers. These were people whose numbers she had saved in her phone, people she once called friends. And now, locked inside Unit 3, Mahogany was trapped in their cruelty with no way out. What began that night was not just torture. It was the systematic breaking of someone's spirit, carried out by the very people she trusted most. What happened inside that apartment was more than violence. It was cruelty designed to strip Mahogany of her dignity. Over the next several hours she was beaten again and again, punched, kicked, dragged across the floor. The blows weren't random. They were deliberate, carried out with a chilling calmness as if this had been rehearsed. She was mocked and humiliated while her attackers laughed. Some taunted her with words meant to cut deeper than fists ever could. Others just stood by, watching silently, proving that doing nothing was its own kind of violence. At one point she was sexually assaulted, the brutality escalating to levels no one should ever endure. But what made this nightmare even more unthinkable was the way it was turned into a show. Phones were everywhere. Her suffering wasn't hidden, it was filmed from multiple angles as if her pain was entertainment. Some recorded, others directed, and no one tried to stop it. The people who once called her a friend now treated her as content. And then the videos spread. They weren't tucked away in secret corners of the internet. They were uploaded and shared casually, sent through group chats, posted on Facebook, whispered through DMs. Clips of her torture traveled faster than the investigation. Strangers watched, some horrified, others disturbingly entertained. For Mahogany's family, the horror didn't end with her death. They had to live with the knowledge that her last moments were circulating online for the world to see. For investigators, those same videos became vital evidence. Faces, voices, timestamps, every detail captured on camera. But for Mahogany, it was the ultimate betrayal. She wasn't just killed. She was turned into a spectacle by people she trusted most. The search for Mahogany ended the way no family ever prays it will. In the early hours of February 25, 2024, police were led to a stretch of land near Laurel Avenue in Birmingham, a place locals knew as an illegal dump site. It wasn't the kind of place where you'd expect to find a young woman with dreams, a business, and a daughter waiting at home. It was where people abandoned what no longer mattered, broken furniture, torn mattresses, and trash left to rot. And that's where they found her. Mahogany's body was discovered face down, covered with discarded mattresses and debris, as if her killers wanted to erase her existence. She had been shot once in the back of the head, execution style, cold, calculated, final. But her injuries told a deeper story. Bruises and lacerations covered her body. Marks on her wrists and ankles showed she had been restrained. Forensic evidence confirmed what the videos had already revealed. She had been beaten, humiliated, and sexually assaulted before her death. Even in her final moments, the cruelty didn't stop. The decision to leave her there at a dump site spoke volumes. To them, she wasn't a friend or a mother or a business owner. They treated her like trash to be thrown away. But to investigators, the scene was not just tragedy, it was evidence. Tire tracks matched to a suspect's vehicle. DNA tied multiple attackers directly to the crime. The bullet in her skull traced back to a weapon in their circle. Piece by piece, the truth came together. Mahogany hadn't been killed in a burst of anger. She had been executed, and every detail pointed to a plan carried out with disturbing precision. For her family, the discovery brought the answer they dreaded most. The daughter, the mother, the fighter they loved, she was gone. And the way she was found only deepened the heartbreak. The brutality of Mahogany's murder shocked Birmingham, but it also lit a fire under investigators.
Live, an update on a case that shocked all of us. Mahogany Jackson, a young Birmingham woman who was tortured earlier this year, some of the abuse even recorded. Well, tonight, charges on 5 suspects in this case have been upgraded to capital murder.
From the moment her body was found, detectives worked around the clock. They had more than just witness statements, they had hours of digital evidence. Every video clip, every screenshot, Every message between suspects became a piece of the puzzle. The evidence trail was overwhelming. Phone records showed the suspects communicating before and after the attack. GPS data placed their movements from the apartment to the dump site. The videos captured not only Mahogany's torment but also the faces and voices of the people responsible. There was no hiding, no mystery. The crime had been documented by the killers themselves. Within 48 hours, police began making arrests. One by one, names familiar to Mahogany were pulled into custody. Brandon Pope, Francis Harris, Jeremiah McDowell, Blair Green, Senia McCall, Ja Lewis, Giovanni Clapp, and Ariana Robinson. 4 men, 4 women, all part of her social circle. Not strangers. Not outsiders. Friends who became executioners.
Now to a breaking news update, 7 of the 8 people charged in the killing and kidnapping of Mahogany Jackson were in a Jefferson County courtroom today. In February of 2024, Jackson was tortured, raped, and murdered. Now several pre-trial motions were heard as prosecutors prepared to take the first cases to trial.
Each was charged with a list of crimes that spoke to the horror of what they had done. First-degree kidnapping, rape, sodomy, felony murder, and ultimately capital murder. Jefferson County District Attorney Danny Carr didn't hesitate. He announced the state would seek the death penalty. For a case this calculated, this cruel, nothing less seemed fitting. The first court appearances were chilling. In front of a judge, the evidence was laid out piece by piece. Videos of the torture. Messages planning the ambush. Forensic proof linking each suspect to the crime. Families in the courtroom wept as details were read aloud. Mahogany's mother sat silently, hearing every word, her grief visible with each description of what her daughter had endured. The suspects showed little remorse. Some sat blankly, others avoided eye contact. But for the community and for Mahogany's family, there was at least one small measure of comfort. Justice was moving forward. The people who betrayed her weren't free. They were behind bars, facing the consequences of their choices. Still, even with 8 arrests and the promise of trials to come, one truth lingered in the air. No sentence, no verdict, no punishment could ever bring Mahogany back. When the arrests were made and the headlines began to fade, what remained was grief. Mahogany's family buried her quietly, without the cameras or the noise, just a mother saying goodbye to her daughter, and a little girl now too young to understand what had been taken from her. Mahogany's salon, once alive with laughter and conversation, sits empty. The mirrors still hang, the chairs still stand, but the light she brought into that space is gone. Outside the Serenity Apartments, neighbors and strangers gathered for a vigil. Pink balloons, her favorite color, floated into the night sky as candles flickered below. Her mother stood among the crowd, silent, watching as hundreds of voices did what her killers never did. They said her name with love, with sorrow, with respect. But even in mourning, another wound refused to close. The videos of her torture, the ones that had turned her pain into a spectacle, kept resurfacing on social media. For her family, it was a second death each time a clip reappeared. Her mother pleaded with the public, please stop sharing them. To her, those videos weren't evidence. They were dehumanizing, a constant reminder that her daughter's suffering had been treated like content. And that's the bigger question this case forces us to face. In a world where cruelty can be filmed, uploaded, and shared in seconds, what responsibility do we carry as bystanders? Should pressing a record make someone just as guilty as throwing a punch? Should silence, should watching be a crime too? Mahogany's story is not just about betrayal. It's about the culture that allowed her torment to spread online, about the silence of those who could have stopped it, and about the cost of misplaced loyalty. Her killers are behind bars, awaiting trial, but her real legacy lives in the conversations her case has sparked. About justice, about loyalty, about how we treat each other when no one is watching. 19-year-old Dakra Thompson had her whole life ahead of her. Fresh out of high school, she was working with a nonprofit, building a future that looked bright and full of promise. But in late August 2025, everything changed. What started as an ordinary night at her father's house in Lanham, Maryland, turned into a nightmare no one saw coming. Dakra told her dad she was heading out to get gas. It was a simple errand, nothing unusual. But when morning came, she hadn't returned. That would be the last time her family ever saw her alive. The next day, her car turned up abandoned in Hyattsville. Her phone was gone, her key fob missing, but her personal belongings were still inside. Surveillance cameras revealed something chilling. Dakra approaching a black SUV in the early morning hours, speaking briefly to the driver, and then climbing into the passenger seat. Hours later, that SUV would end up at a home in Bowie. Police now believe that's where her final moments took place. Days later, the search ended in tragedy. Dakra's body was discovered in a grassy area off Route 50 in Anne Arundel County. She had suffered devastating injuries. The man accused of taking her life is 35-year-old Hugo Hernandez Mendez, now charged with first and second-degree murder. Investigators say the evidence found in his bedroom leaves little doubt about what happened. The question that still lingers is why. Why did Dakra meet him that night? And how did a promising young woman's future get stolen so brutally? This story takes us to Prince George's County, Maryland, a place known for its tight-knit neighborhoods and family bonds. On the evening of August 22, 2025, life at the Thompson household was ordinary. There was no warning, no shadow of what was about to unfold. Around midnight, Dakra told her father she was stepping out to get gas. It wasn't unusual for her to run errands, and she had her father's trust. But as the hours ticked by and the night stretched into morning, something began to feel wrong. By dawn, Dakra still hadn't returned. That nagging worry grew into panic. Her family, who had trusted her completely, now faced a nightmare they weren't prepared for. They reported her missing, setting off a search that would grip Prince George's County. Friends, relatives, neighbors, everyone prayed she'd come back home safe. But behind the scenes, detectives were already beginning to piece together a very different story. Investigators turned to surveillance footage, knowing that in today's world, cameras often tell the truths people cannot. What they found was chilling. On the early morning of August 23, cameras captured Dakra pulling her car into a parking lot in Hyattsville. She got out, walked across the lot, and approached a black SUV. She spoke briefly with the driver before slipping into the passenger seat. That SUV belonged to Hugo Hernandez Mendez, a 35-year-old man from Guatemala. To her family, he was a stranger. To law enforcement, he was about to become their prime suspect. But the question that lingered was why. Why would a 19-year-old girl, raised in a loving home, with her future just beginning, climb into a car with a man more than twice her age, and in the middle of the night? As word spread of her disappearance, speculation took over social media. Some questioned whether Dakra had a hidden life. Whispers began: was she meeting him for money? Was she hiding something from her parents? The truth is, no one really knew. What investigators knew was this: after entering that SUV, Dakra never returned home alive. The SUV was tracked to a home on the 12,000 block of Cambridge Drive in Bowie. There, in one of the bedrooms, police believe Dakra's final moments played out. Forensic teams scoured the room. What they discovered painted a grim picture: bloodstains on the mattress, a fake fingernail that matched one missing from Dakra, and strands of hair consistent with the wig she had been wearing that night. It was clear that what had happened inside those four walls was violent. Later autopsy reports confirmed she had suffered skull and facial fractures, injuries too brutal to be accidental. For days her family held out hope. Search teams combed neighborhoods, wooded areas, and roadways. Flyers went up. Her parents begged publicly for her safe return. But on August 31, 2025, the hope they clung to was shattered. A body was discovered in a grassy area off Route 50 in Anne Arundel County. It was Dakra. The community's worst fears had come true. The 19-year-old, who just days earlier was laughing in her family's living room, was now the victim of a senseless killing. Police moved quickly to arrest Hugo Hernandez Mendez. He was charged with first-degree and second-degree murder. At the time of his arrest, he was described as an undocumented immigrant from Guatemala. For investigators, the evidence against him was overwhelming. His SUV was the last vehicle seen with Dakra inside. Forensics tied her directly to his bedroom. Her injuries matched the violent evidence found at the scene. He was ordered held without bond, awaiting trial. Yet, even with a suspect in custody, questions linger. Why did Dakra agree to meet him? What was the nature of their relationship, if any? Some pointed to rumors that she may have been hiding parts of her life from her parents. Others insisted she must have trusted him enough to willingly get in his car. Her last words to her father that night, "I'll be back soon," now echo as a haunting reminder of promises left unfulfilled. In the aftermath, grief turned to anger. Many in the community questioned how a man with prior run-ins with the law, including a DUI arrest, was still free to walk the streets. Could the system have prevented this tragedy? Her mother voiced her frustration publicly, saying that her daughter's death wasn't just about one violent night, it was also about failures that allowed someone dangerous to slip through the cracks. Online judgment was harsh. Some criticized Dakra's choices, while others reminded the world that no one, no matter the circumstances, deserves what happened to her. Among the noise, one of her closest friends spoke up. Through tears, she reminded people who Dakra truly was. Not the rumors, not the speculation, but the girl she had grown up with. She was kind, she was funny, she was full of life. She had dreams. She had plans. And now, all of that has been stolen. At just 19, Dakra Thompson's life was cut short. A daughter, a friend, a young woman whose story should have been one of growth, ambition, and new beginnings. Her family remembers the laughter she brought into their home, the light she carried into every room, and the kindness she showed to others. Her story, while marked by tragedy, also carries a message, a reminder that safety, trust, and vigilance are not things to take lightly. That behind every headline is a family left broken, a future erased. As the trial for Hugo Hernandez Mendez moves forward, the search for justice continues. But for those who loved her, no sentence, no verdict, can ever fill the void her loss has left. The story of Dakra Thompson is more than a crime report. It is a lesson in how quickly life can change, how fragile trust can be, and how silence in the face of danger only protects the abuser. May her soul rest in peace. And may her story remind us all to hold our loved ones close, because sometimes, tomorrow never comes. Take care, stay alert, and we'll see you in the next video.